Thank you to my colleague Les Van Rijn and the social impact team for the privilege to join you on this extremely beautiful morning. I'm particularly encouraged and elated at seeing the fact that there is so much commitment in this community to being a force for good. You may have seen recently on the internet a picture of me looking like a little cow, and the head of this institution dragging me by the nose. And during the height of the state capture investigation, there were lots of trolls, and one of those trolls was that one, where I'm a little cow being dragged by white monopoly capital to a particular direction. And when I finally chose to join this university, the Guptites, which I call them Guptites because they're defenders of the Guptas, tried to pursue a public narrative that was saying, I came to Stellenbosch University because you guys paid me for not investigating the ABSA matter, that old matter about ABSA having failed to pay its debt, or at least a portion of it. And you're probably wondering whether really I was paid. And if I was paid, I'm very cheap, you see. Because one university that I visited recently reminded me in my face that I had declined the offer of a vice-chancellor position. So I really am cheap because I chose this one. One wanted me for a dean of law. One law firm gave me the liberty to start my own forensic investigation unit, a top law firm in this country. World Bank tried to recruit me for that, this, that, and that. UN tried to very, very seriously and very deliberately, UN really wanted me for a position that would be at the same level as an assistant general secretary. And there were many, many, many offers at the same level. But nobody offered me an opportunity to be the chair of social justice, only the University of Stellenbosch. And listening to the presentation that I've heard this morning, and having worked with colleagues for the last 9 months, I get convinced every day that this was the decision my creator wanted me to take, because here am I with a community of human beings that believe that, number one, we can't go on the way we're going on the issue of social justice. Number two, we can make a difference. Number three, there's so much willingness to do something about social justice. But if it's true then that there's so much good in this country and there's so much we're doing about social justice, what then have we been doing wrong? Is there anything that we've been doing wrong? I believe, yes, there is something we have been doing wrong. And I believe that we can change the way we've been doing things. But if we don't change the way we've been doing things, we're doomed. It's just as simple as that. That in our being doomed, we are going to take down our democracy with us. We're going to take down peace and stability in South Africa. But guess what? The African continent is going down with us. And ultimately, stability in the rest of the world. Why would the African continent go down with us? I sound like a prophet of doom on this very beautiful morning. It's because stability in the African continent has been anchored in stability in this country. Ever since the dawn of democracy in this country, people knew that no matter how bad things can be in the Sudan, in DRC, Central African Republic, Zimbabwe, there's always a country at the tip of the continent where anybody can come in, set up shop, and prosper. Or even if they don't prosper, they can have a relatively meaningful life. So if that becomes impossible, the continent is already fractured, but it will be more fractured. But there's a lot ahead of us. As Charles Dickens once said, it was the best of times, it was the worst of times. I think there's a lot of hope, and the choice of hope over fear and leadership over victimhood is an invincible source of power in times of adversity. And we're here, me and you are in this room because we've chosen hope over fear, because we've decided that we can make an impact in the ecosystem we're part of, whether it's the ecosystem of the university or the ecosystem, the broader Stellenbosch ecosystem, or Cape Town, or the Cape Province, or the country. We have decided that we can make a difference. We meet at a time, though, when everyone in the country is asking, is it dawn or dusk? If I had had this meeting with you at the beginning of this year, as I did with the constituencies of Old Mutual, South Africa, we would have all agreed that we're riding the crest of hope and that we are experiencing a dawn, and that the day ahead of us looked like it was going to be a good one. But after months of celebrating prospects of a new beginning regarding democracy that works and shared prosperity, South Africa has slipped into a technical recession. Well, I put technical in brackets because one of the economic journalists has asked, does it matter whether it's a technical recession or it's a recession? If it's a recession, it's a recession. Does social justice have anything to do with where we are? I mean, a lot of people are saying, well, where we are because Ramaphosa is failing us. Good God, he must be a magician if he was supposed to change the course of both South Africa within 9 months. But basically, people are saying the fact that in 9 months we've ended up with a technical recession instead of a better life, he is failing us. But I'm asking you, dear colleagues who are involved in social impact, whether social justice has any reason, is one of the reasons we're having this technical recession. And going forward, can social impact on that front make a difference as social impact activists? Can we improve the technical? Is there any relationship between this problem about feeling that it's no longer a dawn, it's dusk? Can it be solved through our social justice initiatives or social impact? If so, what needs to change? Well, the meaning of social justice. Social justice is about just and fair access to an equitable distribution of opportunities, resources, privileges, and burdens in a group or between groups. Social justice is ultimately about equal enjoyment of all rights and freedoms by all, regardless of human diversity and historical injustices. Worth noting is that equal enjoyment transcends formal equality. I thought I could spend a minute around the whole question of why social justice is important. Well, the first part is that it's a constitutional imperative. If you look at the preamble to the Constitution, it is going to talk about social justice. But beyond the Constitution, here are some of the reasons social justice is important. We have the Universal Declaration of Human Rights that is dedicated to equal enjoyment of all rights and freedoms. And if you're not sure about that, then you have to look at the you have to look at the Vienna Declaration of 1993, where there was a reinforcement of the message around human rights, that human rights are indivisible and interconnected, and that the failure to advance human rights in one dimension of human rights affects the ability to enjoy human rights in another dimension. For example, we talk about civil and political rights and social and economic rights, but the truth is, if you don't enjoy social and economic rights, you can't enjoy civil and political rights. Let's take a simple issue of poverty. Social economic rights include the right to access to food and freedom from hunger. On the civil and political rights front, we have a right to human dignity. But can there be any dignity in hunger and extreme poverty? Can there? No. So then we have the African Charter on Human and People's Rights. We have SADC shared values. We have the South African Constitution. Well, here I've put both constitutions, the 1993 Constitution and the final Constitution of 1996. And then we have laws such as the Promotion of Equality and Prevention of Unfair Discrimination Act, Employment Equity Act, Preferential Procurement Policy Framework Act, Broad-Based Black Economic Empowerment Act. And then we have ethical considerations. Some of them, the ethical considerations around social justice, come from the Constitution itself. Section 1 of the Constitution talks about the values that underpin our democracy, which is the achievement of equality, freedom, human dignity, and Section 195 talks about the values that should underpin the public service, one of them being the value of equality and fair treatment of everyone. And one of the ethical considerations in the Constitution is Section 237 that requires that everyone, every constitutional obligation be given priority. And if you look at the preamble very specifically, what are the underpinnings of social justice there? One is the Constitution talks about recognizing the injustices of our past. It talks about South Africa belongs to all who live in it, united in our diversity. And it's always important when we say South Africa belongs to all who live in it. It doesn't say it only belongs to those who were here before 1652. It just says it belongs to all who live in it, and regardless of when did they arrive here. It also talks about healing the divisions of the past and establishing a society based on democratic values, social justice, and fundamental human rights. So specifically, social justice is one of the foundations on which this new society is supposed to be built. And then it talks about improving the quality of life of all citizens and freeing the potential of each person. So that's the constitutional foundation of social justice. I've also spoken about the other legal imperatives behind social justice. The Bill of Rights is also another foundation for social justice, whether we're talking about civil and political rights, social and economic rights, cultural rights, and environmental rights. The key there is that everyone is entitled to these things. That's the social justice part of it, is everyone is entitled to those things. But, okay, the Constitution says this must be done. You might say, okay, then it's the job of the state. It's not my job. What's in it for me and you? Why social justice? There's a young Protestant man who is smarter than most of today's human beings around the 1960s already, who thought that social justice is important, whether you're rich or poor. And on realizing that his colleagues who were not affected by injustices, by systemic injustices, at the time of US apartheid, what was called Jim Crow laws, which put black people on a lower human pedestal than white people. They were not allowed to do certain things, to be employed, to work in certain places. And he understood that the social fracture that resulted from the Jim Crow laws couldn't be good for anyone, because as long as there is injustice somewhere, there can't be sustainable peace anyway. And that was around the same time that Martin Luther King actually said that injustice anywhere is a threat to justice everywhere. So James Patrick Kinney penned down a poem that I would like all of you to find and read. It's about 6 people trapped by happenstance, just as we find ourselves here. And of the 6 people, they're sitting around a fire that's dying. And as the fire dies, each of the 6 people has a piece of wood or a log in their hand. And each one of them looks at the dying fire and considers the prospect of using their log of wood to revive the fire. And each one of them looks around the room and finds a person who should not get the benefit of their log. And they decide not to use it. The first one withholds his log because he sees somebody who's not from his church. Not a different religion, just their own church. The second one is white, looks around and sees a black person and decides they're not going to get their log. A rich person sees a poor person and thinks the lazy poor, they're not going to get my log. Not knowing the thoughts of the rich person, the poor person also looks at the rich person and says, they filthy rich, they're not going to get my log. A black person looks at all of these white people and thinks about the oppression he has suffered under their hands and decides it's time for revenge and keeps his log. And then you have somebody that we all know, a person like that. You know, those people who will never give anything but for gain. Do you know those people are not going to give anybody money if they're not going to claim it from SARS? You know people like that. So they look around and say, nobody, if I give my log to these people, I'm not going to get out of it, anything out of it. So they withhold their log. So one withholds their log because of religion, one because of race, another because of race, another because they're rich, of class, and the 2 because of class, and 1 just because he's selfish. But ultimately, all of them withhold their logs in the face of a dying fire. And come the following day, James Patrick Kinney tells us that they're all dead. And all of them have the log still in their hands. They're still hands. And he tells us that they did not die from the cold without. They died from the cold with him. So, me and you, what's in it for us in terms of what we need to do about social justice is just basically simple. We can't afford to die from the cold within. And how would we die from the cold within? The first way we would die is structural inefficiencies. We're experiencing a recession and we blame Cyril. We blame Zuma. We blame somebody. But the reality is structural inefficiencies are known to undermine a society's development. If you have 4 legs and you decide to tie 2 of your legs, can you move efficiently? We've just been given statistics right now around unemployment. Unemployment officially is at about 27%. And it's said that youth unemployment is between 50 and 60-something percent. But we haven't even added the needs, which is not in employment, education, and training. Because unemployment stats are only looking at people who, in the last few months, have been looking for work. Those who have totally forgotten about looking because they've given up are said to be not unemployed. I don't understand you economists, those of you colleagues who are economists, because I really think it's a political lie. As we tell a half a story. The reality is that there's more unemployment than we tell people. But unemployment, that means then though South Africa is functioning with less of its human resources. China, on the other hand, understood that its development path was going to depend on a huge investment in its human resources. That's not the same as just pumping money into education in an input focused. I'm going to come to that, Dr. Leslie, about the difference between being input focused and being impact focused. Is that you can have so much movement in terms of your inputs and so much movement, but no progress at all. If anything, you can have so much movement whilst regressing, which is what has happened on poverty and inequality in South Africa. And so structural inefficiencies undermine society's development, and we have so much structural inefficiencies in this country. You have your black people cobbled in stones. We spoke about generally about unemployment. If you go to your unemployment figures by race, you will see the same patterns of apartheid. The same thing if we go to inequality. If we talk about poverty now, we say it's at 50.5%. That is 1 in every 2 people is poor. But if you go by race, your poorest people are black, African, where poverty is at 64.2%, according to Stats SA. That's almost 2 people out of 3 are poor. And then in poverty, somebody who's still going to send me the stats was showing me that actually there's a 95% chance that when you're poor, the next generation of your family is also going to be poor. A journalist that I met recently is Pippa. I think it's Pippa Green. She's going to send me those stats, which actually for me reinforces why we're having the solution that we're having under the social justice chair. Extremism. When we get extremism, people bomb malls and they leave things everywhere. None of us is safe. So you could say, okay, I'm rich and I can sit on my island. The truth is, an island of prosperity in a sea of poverty is not sustainable. So the whole world is struggling with extremism. And in a speech I gave yesterday, and also paraphrased it in my article in the Financial Mail, which is coming in my next Financial Mail opinion, is that we can blame Trumps, we can blame extremists all we want. The reality is there would be no Trump if there was no extreme poverty. There would be no Trump if there was no extreme gap between the rich and the poor. Because extremism, whether it's the far right or just nationalism, needs to find a fertile ground among those who are desperate, who are hungry, according to sociologists, hungry and angry. And then all political entrepreneurs do is just mine that. They just mine the anger, just as Hitler did. When Jews were in extreme poverty, Hitler just mined that. In Rwanda, the genocide in Rwanda, there were problems of systemic inequality, and people just mined that for their own political gain. So extremism is one of the reasons we need social justice. In real life, when we talk about social justice, in context in South Africa, I think the colleague who spoke earlier gave us the stars. So I don't want to focus on stars. I just want to focus on what you said, sir, around inequality reproducing itself. Is that last year we met someone on June 16. Her name is Palisa. She was arrested on June 16, 1976. Her education was arrested with that process. Her development was arrested. And when we met her last year, she was not the lazy poor. She works hard, she wakes up, she sells some cheap cosmetics. Some days people buy, some days don't buy. But the accumulated social advantages and accumulated social disadvantages show that she's now trapped in a poverty ecosystem. So not only is she poor, she lives in a township that's also poor. Because I could be poor, but living in an ecosystem where I can leverage my social capital to move forward. So my own poverty is mitigated by the ecosystem that I live in that I can be brought into networks that assist me. And one friend of mine who's a journalist speaks about having been born with a disability. And she compares herself with a child who's born with a disability in a poor household in the township. You have hospitals there, you have relatives that can help you, and all of that. But in Palisa's case, today, not only is she poor, there's a risk that her child is going to be poor as well, because her child is not able to go to university. The child couldn't make it into the NSFAS bursary. And then the poverty cycle goes on and on. So equal opportunities exist, entails existence of a real chance to change your station in life, regardless of circumstances of your birth or past injustices. That's really social justice. You would agree with me on that front. Statistics we've already been given, so I'm not going to bother you about that. Where do we sit now? And the task team has the social justice task team that works with the chair of social justice has given us a better set of statistics that I will include next time I talk to you. But what I would like you to look at there is the land question. That there are those who have said on the land question, can we all just shut up? Can just government redistribute what it has and we all live happily ever after? And that reminds me of a story I was told by a colleague at Harvard on how she teaches 8-year-olds about social justice. She makes the 8-year-olds stand in a line and wear blue and pink. And then she says all of the blues should run when the whistle blows, and the pinks should stay. After they've ran miles, she stops the blues and says, listen, kids, you are now equal. When I blow the whistle this time, everyone must run, whether you're blue or pink. And of course the pinks start crying and say, this is unfair. And she doesn't budge. She lets them run. And in that process, obviously you'll find that among the blues, there will be a pattern. Some will be at the front because of their ability, some will be at the back. Among the pinks, you'll find one Wade van Niekerk, who's gonna close the gap between himself and the slowest of the blues. And Ekasta Semenya will also do that. But the pattern will be such that the majority of the blues and the majority of the pinks will always be at the back. And secondly, if it were South Africa, though, if it was the land question and social injustice in South Africa, I would add one dimension to it. I would say, before you run, you blues, take away all of the techies or sneakers from the pinks. And then add another dimension and say, once they've ran, we have a second group of people that are wearing blue and a second group of people that are wearing pink. And then we make it a relay. The blues can only hand their batons to the new blues, and the pinks can only hand their batons to the new pinks. And that's how you get systemic inequality. And can you fix that by simply saying we're now equal? So what are we doing at the moment wrong, though? I think the one thing is we are input focused and not impact focused. The second thing is we're not systems focused. BEE is failing because it was bound to fail. The DAs just said that and everyone got angry. Maybe I can answer your questions at a later stage. Is that because it wasn't systems focused. It was, you can't tinker only part of the system when the whole system is anchored in inequality. You need to move the system in its entirety. The employment equity stats are not doing well because you can't tinker in employment if you're not tinkering in education, you're not tinkering in health, etc. So what are we doing? We pass laws and we keep them in shelves as we've done with the Equality Act. We passed a law that was supposed to deal with systemic inequality. We only implemented the anti-discrimination part. The anti-discrimination part simply assumes we're all equal, but occasionally we treat each other badly. The Constitution talks about achieving equality because it understands that we're never equal. So reducing inequalities in all areas of life was what we're supposed to do. And if you look at apartheid, Verwoerd was smarter than the way we are right now. Verwoerd never thought that if you want to build an unequal society, you will only tinker in one part of that society. He thought you needed to tinker everywhere to make sure that the system complements itself. And we need to do the same. So what are we doing wrong? One size fits all. We pass laws like that, policies, and we say, let's treat everyone the same. Inequality is like debt. How many of you have been in debt? Or how many of you have never been in debt? Or maybe in debt means, have never had a debt. You see, when you have a debt, when you service it in very, very small sizes, the debt, the capital sum accumulates, and eventually it gets bigger and bigger. When you have a debt and you invest more on it, in huge amounts, it reduces faster. So what we've been doing on inequality and poverty, we've been investing in small amounts of money in all over the place. And because of that, the capital debt has been increasing. So poverty is increasing in South Africa, despite all of the things that we're doing, and inequality is increasing. I'm sure those who are in the financial services industry understand that. And examples would be in education. When I was a lecturer at Wits, and I was involved in a lot of research around inequality, we used to say for every white child we pay 4 rand, for a black child we're only paying 1 rand. Post-democracy, we then just decided we'll pay exactly the same amount of money. So we've said to the blues and the pinks, now you're equal. We'll treat you the same. And what's happening to our education system. And of course, I'm not ruling out corruption and misplaced policies, etc. But here is just the one-size-fits-all that fails to deal with accumulated disadvantaged health. I spoke to Minister Aaron Motsoaledi, who said to me, in health, no. The system is perfect. We've graded hospitals into 5 grades for everyone. You can't grade your hospital to 5 grades for everyone. Try Uppington, where for somebody to move from the lowest grade to the highly equipped one, they may have to drive 400 kilometers. So you're not treating a person in Uppington equal to somebody who lives next to Tygerberg Hospital. And so this whole thing of one size fits all is not working. In the courts, for example, we didn't do the same thing. When we did Justice Vision 2000, when I was at the Department of Justice, we were impact focused, not input focused. We said, yes, ideally, a model code should be determined by radius and usage, but we also are going to look at what happens in rural areas. And therefore, the model had variations. Economic inclusion, again, we have a one-size-fits-all. That experiment is one of your examples. And ICT, we have a one-size-fits-all. And which obviously throws out those who are already left behind. What are we doing wrong? Some of our laws are not being implemented. So our state's capability to implement its laws is also not where it should be. And one example is the fact that we abandoned PEPUDA and focused on BEE. And what's our theory of change? Our theory of change is that the greatest challenge to social transformation and socio-economic inclusion is inadequate systems thinking, impact consciousness, and the funding for social change is inadequate. If things persist the way they are, poverty and inequality are going to get worse, and that's a threat to democracy and the rule of law. What's our solution? An M plan for social justice. It's M-Plan for social justice, I'm just going to give you the 5 key result areas. There were 4, but after stakeholder consultations, we now have 5. Can we look at that? The first one is to enhance the state's capacity to pass laws that reduce poverty and inequality through leveraging data analytics, which is algorithms. You get the state to walk the journey when they're implementing laws and look at how is it going to impact on older persons, on children, on rural people, in 1 year's time, in 4 years' time, 5 years' time, 10 years' time, and 100 years' time. And having walked that journey in the virtual space, you then decide, do you still want to implement that law? The other one is to mobilize societal and corporate resources to contribute meaningfully to funding social justice. Sitting around the table, we all investing in little project of social justice, but we understand that that's not going to make the difference. Like debt, it's going to increase regardless of that. So we want to mobilize resources so that we have a huge fund to fund the projects that are going to make the greatest of difference. And then we also want to foster social accountability to ensure that as we are improving from a grounds-up approach, corruption and poor planning on the side of government does not mess up things. We also will leverage international relations to support the social justice plan. And then the 5th one we've just added, after consultation with stakeholders, is that we need to sponsor a national drive towards healing the divisions of the past. And this is to mend social fences. Okay, and then there are coordinating structures and the phases of the project and the next steps. And but just here is in ending, dear colleagues. The relationship between the M Plan for Social Justice and the NDP is, we're actually looking at, the M Plan is about ending poverty by 2030. You do know that the NDP wants to end poverty by 2030, whereas the UN Sustainable Development Goals are to end only extreme poverty by 2030. But it can't happen by itself. So the idea is to overlay everything and then create our own plan. Every generation has the opportunity and responsibility to make the next chapter of its nation a better one. It's our turn, me and you, and I know we're already doing this. The way forward is really to connect our lives and to scale what we're doing. And I believe we can do this. Thank you.